Coentrão is one of the most mysterious players of the last decade. He went from being a little kid from a little town to being compared to Ronaldo and then becoming one of his closest friends and greatest partners. He started off as a winger and ended up becoming one of the most defensively sound fullbacks of his generation. His prime lasted for a little more than 2 years, but somehow he managed to become a cult hero in Madrid, being their secret weapon as they conquered La Décima. Even after his career started fading, drama kept surrounding him, from club betrayals to a literal militia of fans storming the club's training grounds and beating up the players, to finally retiring way too soon and becoming a fisherman. He was always a living contradiction, which only made his story more interesting. Enjoy. It all started in Caxinas. Coentrão grew up watching men sailing to the sea in wherever janky boat they could get, hoping that the money they got from their catch would be enough to feed their families. Unfortunately, every year one of the boats ended up not making it back to shore. It's a tough life that breeds even tougher men. No one would judge him for dreaming of the day he would get to leave that town. But he didn't. Even when it became obvious he was gifted, he never resented his origins. He never felt like a big fish in a small pond. He completely embraced them and allowed himself to become a reflection of his people, their biggest pride. Regardless, at 13 he left school and began working. He painted houses, he learned how to bake bread, and even worked in construction. But then, his family decided to move to France looking for a better life. And still, Coentrão talked to his coaches and decided to stay behind, alone. No matter how young he was, soon he had become just as tough as the people who surrounded him. And every time he entered the pitch, you could see that. At 17, he got his debut for a local club, Rio Ave, still playing as a winger back then, but by the time he became a regular, they were already set for relegation. Regardless, even though he was now further from the spotlight, he still managed to become the center of attention, being nicknamed as Figo das Caxinas and being compared to players like Cristiano Ronaldo, Quaresma, and even to Arjen Robben by World Soccer magazine, who named him as one of the 50 biggest talents in the world in 2007. Unbelievable that he managed to make waves like that despite not even achieving promotion to the Portuguese First Division that year. At this point, Benfica and Sporting went head-to-head for his signing, and though he was born a Sporting fan, Benfica offered more money and in the end, he ended up joining them for €1 million. At Benfica, the young winger would have to battle for a place in the team with players like Di Maria, Rui Costa, and even Freddy Adu, so the outcome was simple. 6 months later, he was shipped off to Nacional de Madeira, and man oh man, was he good. I remember being a young boy standing in a coffee shop with my dad watching him play a match against Porto, the team I supported. We thought we were unstoppable. We had lost 2 league games all year and went on to win the league by a margin of 20 points, but that day, Coentrão, a 19-year-old with some dumb frosted tips, put us down to our knees. His first goal, one absurdly precise shot to the far post. Then, an unbelievable ship from outside the box like I thought only Totti would be capable of. And then, an assist to finish off the match. We had just lost 3-0 and my dad wasn't even too upset. I asked about Coentrão and he just said, if only Porto had gotten to him first. You gotta recognize talent when you see it. Still, despite all of that, what happened next was arguably one of the worst pieces of career management in football history. Benfica insisted on loaning him out, so a move to Feyenoord was set up and it seemed wonderful. In the Eredivisie, sharing a locker room with Van Bronckhorst, Roy Mackay and even a young Wijnaldum. Perfect. But then, Benfica backtracked on everything and sent him to Zaragoza in the Spanish second tier, where he got a total of 7 minutes of playing time before being sent back to Portugal, where he just ended up being loaned to Rio Ave. He was back when it all began. Lots of people were seriously losing hope on him. However, he once again excelled, scoring an absolute screamer against Porto that the Benfica supporters sure loved to see, and so they were forced to give him a chance. And then, 6 matches into the season and Coentrão was on 5 assists already despite only getting around 20 minutes per match. Jorge Jesus had a problem. Coentrão was too good to keep on the bench, but well, so was Di Maria. You know what they say, in times of struggle, improvisation is key, and as good as Coentrão was as a winger, he was never much of a goal threat, but he was the kind of player that just keeps nibbling on your ankles until you're forced to let go of the ball. So, Jesus turned him into a fullback, and he never looked back. After this change, he became a key player for Benfica. If once he battled Di Maria for a spot, he was now combining with him for one of the deadliest duos in the league. It was beautiful to see and so effective that Benfica were finally champions after 4 consecutive titles for Porto. The following season was one to remember. Together they defeated PSG, PSV and Stuttgart, nearly making it to the final of the Europa League. And still, Coentrão was one of the most polarizing players of the moment. He was just as capable of playing beautiful football as he was of doing the dirty work, once even getting 10 yellow cards and 2 reds in a span of just 10 matches. Once José Mourinho realized that putting him beside Ramos and Pep would be a match made in heaven, his release clause of 30 million euros was triggered. Coentrão was now the 5th most expensive defender of all time and the 2nd most expensive fullback, only behind Dani Alves. But yet, this was a transfer that left many scratching their heads in confusion. Real had Marcelo, considered by many the greatest left-back of all time. How could Coentrão ever beat that? Some thought Mourinho had some trick up his sleeve, but what he had was full confidence that Coentrão could go head-to-head with Marcelo for his spot in the team. Though in fact he ended up playing many matches as a midfielder in his first season, Coentrão adapted effortlessly to this new league. After all, there were many familiar faces around, Di Maria, Pep, Ricardo Carvalho, but it would be the great man himself who would take him under his wing. Cristiano was like a big brother for Coentrão. He once even joked that he helped him with anything he needed, that he was always knocking on his door for help, and when Cristiano didn't open, he just climbed the fence. Right on that first season, Ronaldo would put their brotherhood on display for all to see when a journalist famously asked him this.
Concentrão, que é esse jogador? Concentrão. Coentrão.
Regardless, Coentrão's impact on the squad was undoubtable. Right on his first game, he was man of the match and had newspapers referring to it as a Hollywood debut. With him on the pitch, Real Madrid would win 20% more matches than without him. In-game, his relationship with Cristiano was even closer and it led him to a career-high 60 goals in a season and led Real Madrid to a record 100 points in the league, finally handing them a league title after 3 consecutive for Barcelona. After a season like this, Coentrão was locked and loaded, and by the time he got to the 2012 Euros, it was a tournament for the ages. Spain had dominated Europe for years now, and everyone was looking to dethrone them. Over the group stage, Coentrão played some of the most exceptional defensive matches of his career and still managed to show up at key moments to help the team in attack, most impressively assisting the winning goal in the dying minutes of the match against Denmark. When the time to face Spain finally arrived, a win meant a place in the final. It was a tough match, but if any team had caused them problems, it was Portugal, who had even humiliated them 4-0 in a friendly soon after they had become world champions. In the end, Portugal had impressed, but in penalties, a miss by Bruno Alves saw them leave the tournament. Regardless, Coentrão had by far been a standout and he was rewarded with a place in the team of the tournament. He was now officially at the top of European football. As Coentrão became more and more important for Real Madrid, he was handed the greatest opportunity of his career. In 2012, Marcelo broke his metatarsal and would play just 19 games all season. Coentrão made the most of it, and by the time Marcelo made it back, there was no doubt Coentrão started every single Champions League knockout match ahead of him. Injured or not, he had successfully benched the world's greatest fullback. And even if that season ended in disaster with Real falling just short in every competition and Mourinho being shipped out in favor of Ancelotti, who would make Marcelo the main man once again, whenever Madrid played a tougher match, Coentrão would take over, and despite playing just 20 matches that season, more than half of them came against Atletico, Barcelona, Bayern, Dortmund and Schalke. Coentrão was their secret weapon, and that became evident once he was deployed against Bayern in the semi-finals. Just a few weeks ago I told you the story of how Robin became one of the most unstoppable players of all time. Well, over those 2 matches, Coentrão stopped him. In fact, he made him look like a schoolboy. That, paired with an assist to Benzema, made it perhaps Coentrão's greatest performance. A show of defensive prowess that ensured Real a place in the final of the Champions League and made La Décima possible. When going back and reminiscing about those days, it's easy to talk about players like Ronaldo, Ramos or Bale. But on that first success, Coentrão was the one working in the shadows, doing the dirty work, a true legend of Real Madrid. Despite all of those achievements, Coentrão was never the happiest in Madrid. His ruggedness meant he wasn't the poster boy they wanted him to be, he was still the same street kid. He even got caught smoking cigarettes a couple of times, and even if that never stopped him, as he said it himself, he felt like the team's ugly duckling. Still, he was only 26 years old at this point, he had the world in his hands. But unfortunately that year over summer, he joined Portugal for the World Cup and after just an hour of play, he came out injured. He would spend the next months on the sidelines only to come back twice and get injured again almost immediately. By the time the season was over, he had played the full 90 just a handful of times. Real Madrid had never been known for being a patient club, and so Coentrão was loaned out to Monaco. Once there, in just one season, Coentrão went through 6 different injuries, and the last of those would leave him out for 7 months. 7 months that, to his great despair, coincided perfectly with the Euro 2016. Coentrão loved the national team, and watching them go on to win the Euros without him was the final dagger to kill any bit of motivation he had left. The following season with Real, he spent another 4 months on the sidelines and played only 6 matches, not playing a single knockout tie as they would go on to win the Champions League. The boy from that village by the sea had dared to live his dream, but now he was just a silent observer, a shadow of his former self looming in the sidelines. For the final chapter of his career, Coentrão would return home, and if you think that he'd be welcomed with cheers, I'm sorry to say that wasn't the case, because he would join Sporting on loan and not his old team Benfica, making him one of the most hated players in the country. At Sporting, his ex-coach Jorge Jesus insisted on having him even after he failed his medical exams. Coentrão was handled like a delicate glass piece, and it worked. He played 44 matches that season despite going through 7 injuries once again. That season prompted one of the most unbelievable moments in Portuguese football. Sporting had invested big, but then, though they had won the League Cup and were the heavy favourites to win the Portuguese Cup, they lost their Champions League spot in the last match of the season, so out of nowhere, 40 masked men entered the Sporting training grounds, cornering the players inside the building and physically assaulting them with iron clubs and all other sorts of blunt objects. Over the following months, Sporting saw many of their players terminate their contracts in protest, but despite the exodus of players leaving Sporting, Coentrão wanted to stay. He said, "I waited for them, I gave them everything last year, but then nothing, not even a call. Of course I was sad." After this betrayal, Coentrão joined Rio Ave once again for a single season, despite interest from many clubs across Europe. Still, it wasn't the end of the drama. At 31, he retired, went a year without playing, then came back one more season and retired again. He struggled to find his place in the world now that football was done, but eventually he realized his place was amongst his people in Caxinas, so he went back and became a fisherman. He now owns a fleet of ships and he's become a great benefactor in his hometown, hiring upwards of 50 people, and most impressively, one of his ships saved 15 sailors whose boats sunk near the Portuguese coast. In the end, it all came full circle. This was Fábio Coentrão's career in a video. I hope you enjoyed. See you next week. Bye.